Okay, so good morning, everyone. So today we'll be continuing our next session on Python programming itself, where we left off like until doing all the programs which were related to maths, like mathematical related programs, and then we utilized the algorithm called as Python sorting, uh, which was like using bubble sort, and we sorted the numbers in ascending as well as descending order, and then we took some programs which were related to text also, like related to string, like processing the strings and using those strings to calculate their values in terms of length or like in terms of character and process them. So moving forward, today we'll be doing a next program, which is a program to identify or like or program to determine if given list is monotonic or not. So first thing is, what is this monotonic? So monotonic is nothing but, like, let's say we have a numbers list, and in this numbers list I have these numbers which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So looking at this array or a list, it has is all the numbers in increasing order, right? Here the numbers are in increasing order. So if my numbers inside my list are in increasing order, or if my numbers in my list are in like decreasing order, then I say like it is a monotonic array. So what is monotonic array? A monotonic array is nothing but if my list contains numbers in increasing order. If you see these numbers, they are like in increasing order, or if my list contains numbers in decreasing order, which is like 4, 3, 2, 1. Now this number of elements in this list can be infinite, like until the limit of this list. So you can contain like n number of elements present in it, and if they are in like increasing or decreasing order, we can say it is a monotonic array. So how do we know like which is not a monotonic array? So example would be, we have a list, but we cannot determine its order, like it's increasing or decreasing. So example here is, let's say 1, 2, 0, and 4. So here, if you see all the numbers, if you go from 1 to 2, it is increasing, but after 2 to 0, it is decreasing, right? So it is both like increasing as well as decreasing. So we cannot perfectly determine what is the exact order of this array. And because of that reason, we'll say like this array is non-monotonic, or like a not a monotonic array. Whereas for the top one, we'll say like it is a monotonic. And for second one also, we'll say it is monotonic. So this is the exact logic behind the program. Like we'll be given a list which contains numbers in it, and we just need to like print if that list is monotonic or not a monotonic. So now since we want to determine the monotonic or non-monotonic, like we'll go by our like the like default structure of a program, which is like creating a function. Let's say define monotonic, and as part of input I will take is numbers array, and here my internal processing would come. Then I would declare my array. Let's say I'll take a monotonic array and I'll call my function. So this completes a step one of creating the structure of a program. Now we'll go into like how to determine that logic. So now that logic would be, what we'll do is we will refer two elements at a time. So let's take an example. We have is this numbers, and this is our logic. So we have is this input. Now what we'll do is we will take two numbers at a time. So my first number would be 1 and my second number would be 2. So I'll take the first two numbers at a time and I'll compare. So I'll compare is what I'll see is if my number first number is lesser than second number, if it is true, that is if 1 is less than 2, that means if my first number is lesser than second number, so for that I have written is the corresponding logic. And if it is true, that means we know it is an increasing, right? So I can say like increase equal to true. So what is this increase? Increase is nothing but a variable I've created as a flag. And this flag will do is just have the value like true or false. And so what we'll use is this increase flag. We'll take these two numbers and compare like 1 is less than 2. So I've set my increase equal to true. That means I am getting to know that it might be in increasing order. Later on, in after my loop 1 completes, loop 2 would be 2 and 3 would be taken into consideration. And after I take these two new numbers, which is 2 and 3, I will compare again. Like if my 2 is less than 3, so if this condition is again true, so I'll again update my increase flag to true. So that means I'm consistent. So I know until 1, 2, and 3, my increase is true. And later on, I'll move to the next two numbers, which are the last two numbers, 3 and 4, and I'll compare the logic. If 3 is less than 4, that is true. So I'll set increase equal to true. So by end of the loop, I'll have this flag as true. And since it is true, I'll say it is monotonic array. But what if the second condition comes, like the decreasing order, right? So if we have, let's say, decreasing numbers, how do we determine that? So this is the decreasing order of array. So here also we'll follow the same approach. We'll take two numbers at a time. So first is 4 and the second number is 3. And here we'll check is if my first number is greater than my second number. So that means it is decrease, right? So I'm taking a new variable for keeping a track of decreasing order so that my second condition for monotonic also should be like calculated. So I'm taking another flag called as decrease. And if this condition satisfies, and what was my condition? Condition was if my first number is greater than second number, then I'll say decrease equal to true. But if it is not, then I'll say decrease equal to false. That's as straightforward as it is. So once my loop 1 completes, then I'll check 3 and 2. So here again, 3 is greater than 2. So that's why my decrease will be again updated to true. And lastly, it would be 2 and 1. So here also 2 is greater than 1. So this condition of if satisfies and we'll update decrease equal to true. So at the end of the list, we have calculated all the numbers, like we have taken all the numbers into consideration. And based on this if loop criteria, our decrease is true. But parallelly, if you see, if this is my input, so what should be my increase by default? My increase should be false, right, by default, because based on this order of numbers, I'll always update this decrease flag, but I will never touch this increase flag for this array. Whereas for the same one for this, here my numbers are in increasing order. So every time, whenever I'm processing two numbers, it will only update is increase flag and not at all touches the decrease flag. So for my first logic, my decrease flag would be by default false only. And for my second list of numbers, my increase flag would be by default false. So after this, what we need to do is we just need to make a check. Like if my increase, okay, let's take the third example also into consideration, and then we'll identify these two flags, how they are like looking after we process all the numbers. So my first check for ascending order of numbers is like created, like the logic is created. And if I get the numbers in descending order, this is the logic. And lastly is like numbers which are in unsorted format, like which are like random numbers. Now here I will take two numbers again at a time, 1 and 2. Here I'm checking if my first number is less than second number. So this is true, right? So since it is true, I will do is increase equal to true. So here this if logic is nothing but the first one. So basically by default I'm doing is these two checks at a time. Like whenever I get two numbers, I'll check for these two if loops. If my first number is less than second number, or if my first number is greater than second number. So here my first number is less than second number. That's why it is true. Now I'll take the next two numbers, which is 2 and 0. Now I'll check if my first number is less than second number. This is false, right? Because my first number is greater than second number. So since my first number is greater than second number, which means this is the condition. So what I should do is decrease equal to true. So ideally for my second if loop, 2 is greater than 0. That means I got like decrease equal to true. So since decrease is equal to true, after processing these three numbers, what we see is both my flags increase is also true and decrease is also true. Whereas if you see these two arrays, either one of that flag is true and second one is always false. So what would be our end check? End check should be if my both flags are true, increase and decrease are true, I will print it is a not a monotonic array. But if only one of my flag is true, like either my increase is true or decrease is true, then I'll print is monotonic array. So that is the logic we'll be using. So looking at this, what we need to do is basically just write, or basically we'll be taking two numbers using the for loop at a time, and those two numbers will, for comparison of those two numbers, we'll do is utilize two if loops. One if loop condition should be first number is lesser than second number, and second if condition should be first number greater than second number. And if that condition satisfies, I should do is increase equal to true. And if my second number or first number is greater than second number, then I should do is decrease equal to true. And keep on doing. So at the end of the loop, we'll get the updated values, like final values in these two flags, and we'll do a comparison, like we'll check like what is the value present in both of the flag and determine if it is a monotonic or not. So now we'll go into the program. So this was our logic. Now what the program is basically easier to understand now. So what we were discussing was mainly into two flags. So I'll take the two flags, increase and decrease. So by default, I always want them, since I haven't like processed anything, by default, I should put a false value in both of them. And whenever I find that pair, which is increasing or decreasing, then I'll update that flag to true. Now, as discussed, what we'll be doing is taking two numbers at a time. So for I in range, what I'll be doing is from 1, which is my start, to length of numbers, which is my end. Now, why I took 1 is I'll let you know. So nums So how can I take the first number is nums of I minus 1. So I is nothing but 1. So 1 minus 1 is 0. So nums of 0 is nothing but the first number. And what is nums of I? So nums of 1 is nothing but the second number. So that's how we got like first two numbers into our these two variables, nums of I minus 1 and nums of I. And then what we wanted to do is like since we got these two numbers, we wanted to do is a check. Like if my first number is this, if my first number is lesser than second number, if it is true, then what I was doing is increase equal to true. And what about my second number? If my first number, which is nums of I minus 1, is greater than second number, which is this, then I should do is decrease equal to true. So this way, this if loop, which I have selected, is going to do this consideration logic, or where like if my input is in increasing, then this if loop is going to make sure like it is going to give us the correct output. And for the second scenario, this if loop is going to make sure like it is properly calculated. And for the third scenario, we don't need to utilize this for loop. Outside the for loop, once the processing is done, we will have the final values in increase and decrease flag. So lastly, what we just need to do is if my increase and decrease equal to true, then I should print is not a monotonic array, else it is a monotonic array. So why we took this if loop, like both flag as true to determine it is not monotonic, is because of this third example which we saw. Like since for this non like a random sorted array, right, where we cannot determine it is increasing or decreasing. For this scenario, which is our third scenario over here, for this scenario, our both of these flags increasing are going to be true, because at a point for given two numbers, they can be either increasing or decreasing both. So that's why these two flags are always set to true by end of the numbers. But for increasing and decreasing, you're only one of the flag, like either increasing is going to be true or your decreasing is going to be true, but not both of them is going to be true. So this is our break condition. Like if my both flags are true, I will say it is not a monotonic array. And the else case is like either one of them is true. So we'll just print it as a monotonic array. So for now, let's test our logic and see like if it's working or not. So based on this input, I should get it is a monotonic array. So that is what we are getting. It is a monotonic array. Now let's put the other way of numbers 4, 3, 2, and 1 and run it. This is also getting monotonic array. What about if we change, if we just remove the sorting of the numbers, and now here it is not in increasing or decreasing, right? So it should tell us it is not a monotonic array. So that is what it is telling us, not a monotonic array. And using this for loop, what we did was we took two numbers at a time, the first two numbers, like adjacent two numbers at a time, and then we did a comparison using this if loops. So first if loop is going to consider for the increasing order, second if loop is going to consider for decreasing, and by the end of this for loop, all the numbers would be processed and we will have final values in increase and decrease flag. And by the end of the processing, we'll check if my both flags are true, that means it is not a monotonic array, else it is a monotonic array. So that completes our logic and program for monotonic array calculation. So let me save this in our notes. Then we will move to the next program. Okay, so this completes our monotonic array program. Now we'll move on to the next program. So next program is also going to be something like related to numbers, like where we'll be using the list, and for that list we'll try to do some kind of processing on it. Now the program here would be, let's say we have to write a program, or let's say an example, like we have a numbers list, and here my numbers are like none, two, and none. So this is my list, and what this list is telling us is it has elements present in it, which is like numbers and none. Now, what does this none means? So none is nothing but whenever at a given location within this list, if there is no value present, like any value, right? Like either a character like this or like a number like this, then that empty space which is occupied here is called as none. Basically, this location doesn't contains any value, and that value is called as none value. So basically, it doesn't hold any value. You cannot perform any kind of calculation over it or processing over it. So what we need to do is we need to go through this list, and while we are going from left to right, we need to fill these none values. Like these are basically empty values, so we need to fill it with non-empty values. So how do we want to fill these values? So while going from left to right, we need to fill it with the latest non-none value, which is the one, right? Like now let's say I'm going from left to right. Now first number is one. So this is not a none value, right? It is a value. So one is there. Now I got here at none. So now I determine like, okay, this is a none. So I need to fill this none value with some number in it. Now what should be that number? So at this location, the number should be 1 because this is the latest value which we know, which is not a none. So how it will look like is 1 comma 1 for this second one. Then we'll move on to the next number, which is 2. So here we are not having any issue because it is an actual number and not a none. And lastly, when we come over here, it is none. Now here we need to determine what should be the value present in this. So value present in this should be the latest value. Now my latest value is nothing but the previous three elements value, which was the 2. So 2 is the latest value from my last three processed values. So it should be 2 comma 2. So that way these none values would be filled up with the latest values. So latest value at this point we know was 1, and latest value at this point we know was 2. So now let's say we have one more example, right? Like where nuns are, there is no number in between, right? Like let's say we have this format 1 comma none comma none comma none. So how should my array look like? So here initially I got a 1 which don't have an issue. Now I got a none value. Now this none should be filled with the latest value which is 1 from the previous. Again I come over here and try to see which is my latest value. Now latest value I know as of last two elements is 1. So I'll fill it with 1. And lastly for the last one also it will be 1 because that's the latest value we know. So this should be the program required for us to fill all the none values with latest values. So our title would be program to fill none values with latest values in list, where my input is this, either this or this, and my output should be this. So now as we always do the program, we'll create the structure where I'm defining a function, and as part of input it will take is the list. Then I will take is the input list and call to the function. Now, how do we write the program? Like what should be my exact logic to fill this? Now, logic here would be whenever I'm going from left to right, I will take a variable into consideration and try to see if that value is none or not none. So let's take a variable called as previous variable. And in that previous variable, we'll store that value, which is the first value present in us. And then we'll try to move from there. So what we'll do is my logic. And as I said, we'll take a variable called as like, let's say previous, and it should be my first number. So first number is 1, which is nothing but nums of 0, right? It is the first value. Nums of 0 is my first number, which is nothing but 1. Now I have the first number. And later on, what we'll be doing is we will loop from my second number from here to here. And while I'm here, I'll check with my previous value. And if my current value is none, then I will replace it with the previous value and then move forward. So what I was saying is, let's say I'm at nums, let's say my I equal to 1. So what is my nums of I? Nums of I is nothing but nums of 1, and nums of 1 is this none. Now here, this is none. So what I should do is nums of I should be replaced with previous, right? And this previous is nothing but 1. So what I'm doing is at nums of I, which is nums of 1, here I'm populating it with previous value. Previous value is 1. So this would be updated with 1. And once it is updated, we should update this previous value also. Now, what should be my previous value? Previous value should be equal to my latest value, which is nums of I. So that way, we keep track of the latest values as well as the next value which we want. So how should be my logic here? My logic value will be like, let's say previous equal to nums of 0. This was my first. And then I'll write a for loop for I in range. And since we wanted to go from second element, I'll write is 1 comma length of numbers. So this for is going from this to my last number, which is from none to the last number. And here I'll check is if my nums of I, which is this ith location, right? Is it equal to none? If it is true, then what I was doing is that value, which is this nums of I, should be updated to the previous value. And what was my previous value? Previous value was 1. And later on, my previous value should be updated to nums of I. So post update, my nums of I would contain 1 here, and that 1 is again updated to previous. So that when we take the next number, I have the previous value as 1 and nums of I as 2. And lastly, it will process. So now here we are going by a consideration that always in future we are going to find out a value which is none. But what if there is all the numbers are already populated, but we don't even need to execute this loop, right? So what should we do? So let's try to see. First thing is run this program and see like if it's working for all the input arrays or not. So now I will run it and try to see if it is showing me or not. Okay, so I have not printed print nums because after function is calculated, I didn't do a print, so that's why we're not seeing anything. So here we are seeing like it is properly updating, but it's not properly updating for the last value. And that is because of one check which is not happening because length of nums will go only until this position. And when I'm at this position, nums of I was 2, oh sorry, nums of I was 1 itself, but it was not updated. So what we need to do is here else is also required where we should do is previous equal to nums of I. So this check would help us basically keep a track that whenever there is a non-none value like this scenario, our previous value should also be updated. So now let's go back to the looping logic again now. So now I'll show you how like every one after one number, what are my previous and my every values after every loop. So loop number 1, what is my previous? By default, it is nothing but nums of 0, which is but 1. And now what I am doing is nums of I, right? Now what is my nums of I? Nums of I is going from 1, which is nothing but nums of 1, which is equal to none. So here I'm checking if nums of I is equal to none. That means it is true. So this is true condition. So what should happen is my nums of I, which is will become equal to previous. So what is doing is nums of 1 is equal to 1. So this none is replaced with 1 because of this condition. And later on, this previous becomes nums of I. Sorry. So previous equal to nums of I, and nums of I is nothing but 1, right? So after I process these two numbers, my previous is 1 and nums of I is 1. So that's why it was working. Now next loop, number 2, my previous is 1 and then nums of I is nothing but nums of 2, right? Because after we have done this processing, it will move to here where my I is updated from 1 to 2. So that's why it is nums of 2 and the value internally is 2. So here we'll check the if condition. If nums of I equal to none, So this is false, right? Because nums of I is 2. So your internal these two sentences, this block of code will not execute. But what will execute is this one, which is previous equal to nums of I. That is previous equal to nums of 2 equal to 2. So if you look at this point, our previous has been updated to 2, which is the latest value. So this else is required for keeping a track of the scenario where when we get a none value, like non-none value, then we should keep that track into this previous value. And then when we move to the last one, which is loop number 3, what is my previous value? Previous value is nothing but 2 because of this.
So time is there, no? Or it's getting end.
Oh yeah, we have like 2.5 minutes, so we're good. So nums of I equal to nums of 3, which is nothing but none. So what we'll be doing is if nums of I equal to none, so this is true like this. And since it is true, what we should do is nums of I becomes previous. And previous is nothing but nums of 3 equal to 2. So nums of 3 equal to 2 means 0, 1, 2, and 3. So nums of 3 becomes 2. So this is where we update it with the latest value. And then we'll update previous equal to nums of I, which is nothing but 2, which is the latest value. And else would not be executed. So by end of this loop, we see like all the numbers are populated, which we require. So is there any doubt or any kind of confusion with this programs? So looks like there is no doubt. So let me save this into our notes and we will move. So today we'll be just having this only a single session, uh, and most probably that is our like today's session. But before we wrap off, like, do you have any kind of doubt with the program for the homework? If there are
No,
no, okay,
No, sir, no.
okay. So if the
Manisha, even
session,
you got the answer, no? Output.
ma'am, I have not tried it again. Once I will done, then if there is, then I will ask.
Okay, fine, sure.
okay,
So that we can now end now. Okay,
yeah,
as Sir is also having some work.